In the spiritual traditions of the East, there exists a profound understanding that enlightenment is not achieved through intellectual mastery alone, nor through the accumulation of knowledge, but rather through a fundamental shift in consciousness that begins with peace. This principle, echoed in the teachings of many spiritual masters including Paramahansa Yogananda, suggests that before one can truly understand the nature of reality, before one can commune with the divine, before one can transcend the limitations of the ego self, one must first learn to speak the language of peace. This is not merely the absence of conflict or turmoil, but rather a deep, vibrant, alive silence that permeates consciousness itself. Before we begin, if you enjoy this video, give me a like, comment below about your thought and hit subscribe button so you don't miss any video inspired by Yogananda's teaching. Thank you very much. Peace, in this context, represents something far more profound than a pleasant emotional state or a temporary respite from life's demands. It is the fundamental substrate of all existence, the ground of being from which all other experiences arise and into which all experiences eventually dissolve. To speak the language of peace is to attune oneself to frequencies of consciousness that lie beyond the surface turbulence of thoughts, emotions, and sensations. It is to discover that beneath the constant chatter of the mind and the endless cycling of desire and aversion lies an ocean of stillness that has never been disturbed, an eternal present that exists independent of time's passage. The journey toward enlightenment traditionally begins with the recognition that humanity exists in a state of fundamental alienation from its true nature. We have become accustomed to identifying ourselves with the contents of consciousness, with thoughts, emotions, memories, and sensations, rather than with consciousness itself. This mistaken identity creates a subtle but pervasive sense of separation and incompleteness. We seek fulfillment through external means, through the acquisition of possessions, relationships, achievements, and experiences, never realizing that what we truly seek is already present within us. This endless outward seeking produces an endless inner turbulence. The mind becomes like an ocean caught in perpetual storm, with waves upon waves of desire, fear, regret, and anticipation churning endlessly. Peace emerges as the antidote to this condition. When an individual begins to turn their attention inward, to quiet the constant demands of the external world and the relentless machinations of the restless mind, something remarkable occurs. In the space of silence that begins to open, peace naturally arises. This is not a peace that needs to be constructed or maintained through effort alone, but rather a peace that reveals itself when the obstacles to its recognition are removed. It is like clearing away clouds to reveal the sun that has been shining all along. Learning to speak the language of peace involves developing sensitivity to the subtle movements of consciousness itself. In ordinary waking life, the mind is so densely packed with thoughts, sensations, and perceptions that we rarely notice the gaps between them, the moments of pure awareness that exist between one thought and the next. Yet these gaps are always present. With practice and attention, one becomes increasingly aware of these intervals, and more importantly, becomes aware of the quality of consciousness that characterizes these moments. This quality is peace, not as something separate from consciousness, but as consciousness recognizing itself in its natural state, undisturbed and whole. The first language of enlightenment, then, is not made up of words or concepts. It cannot be captured in philosophy or theology, though it can be pointed toward through these means. Rather, it is a direct, non-verbal communication between the individual consciousness and the universal consciousness from which it has never truly been separate. This communication occurs in the realm of being rather than in the realm of doing. When the agitated surface of the mind finally stills, the individual discovers that they have been continuously held in an embrace of infinite peace, cradled in a love that is both impersonal and intimately personal. One of the paradoxes that spiritual traditions have long taught is that peace is simultaneously the most difficult thing to attain and the easiest, since it is our natural state that we have never actually lost. The difficulty lies not in achieving peace, but in removing the obstacles, the mental habits, the emotional patterns, the deeply ingrained beliefs in separation and lack, that prevent us from recognizing it. The ease lies in the fact that peace does not need to be created or earned, it only needs to be unveiled. The spiritual practices traditionally associated with the path to enlightenment, meditation, prayer, breath work, ethical development, study of sacred texts, and service to others, all serve this central purpose. They are methods for quieting the mind and opening the heart to the recognition of peace. Meditation, for instance, is fundamentally about creating space in consciousness. Through meditation, one learns to observe thoughts without being swept away by them, to notice emotions without being identified with them, to witness the body without being confined to bodily awareness. With continued practice, the mind begins to settle like sediment in a glass of water, and in this settling, peace naturally emerges. Yet peace is not meant to be a condition that only exists in meditation, isolated from the rest of life. Rather, the ultimate goal of spiritual development is to maintain an underlying current of peace while fully engaged in the activities and relationships of daily existence. This represents a mature spirituality in which the inner tranquility that one discovers through meditation gradually becomes integrated into all aspects of living. One learns to speak the language of peace not just in the inner sanctuary of meditative consciousness, but in interaction with others, in response to challenges, in the face of loss and difficulty. The development of this capacity involves a fundamental reorganization of how one relates to experience. In ordinary consciousness, the ego constantly divides reality into categories of desirable and undesirable, seeking the former and avoiding the latter. This creates tension, because reality does not actually conform to our preferences. Things that we wish to avoid inevitably arise, and things that we desire inevitably pass away. This collision between the ego's preferences and the nature of reality creates suffering. Peace emerges when this fundamental stance of resistance and grasping begins to soften. Instead of constantly fighting against what is, one learns to accept reality as it presents itself while maintaining the freedom to respond wisely and compassionately. This acceptance is not passive resignation or fatalistic acceptance of injustice. Rather, it is the recognition that peace does not depend on circumstances being exactly as we prefer them to be. One can be fully engaged in creating positive change, working toward justice, pursuing worthy goals, and simultaneously maintaining an interior peace that is not dependent on the success or failure of these external efforts. This represents a profound freedom, the freedom to act from wisdom and love rather than from fear and compulsion. The language of peace also speaks through the heart. As meditation deepens and the mind begins to quiet, attention naturally moves to the heart center. Many spiritual traditions point to the heart as the seat of true consciousness, the place where the individual soul communes with the divine. In the depths of the heart lies an infinite tenderness, a compassion that extends not only to humans but to all living beings. This compassion arises naturally when the sense of separation begins to dissolve, when one intuitively recognizes that all beings are expressions of the same underlying reality, manifestations of the same universal consciousness. The peace that emerges from this heart-centered awareness carries with it an inherent love. It is not sentimental or emotional, but rather a fundamental affirmation of the value and sacredness of all existence. From this place of peace and love, one naturally behaves differently in the world. There is less need to defend, control, or manipulate. There is more capacity to listen deeply, to see others clearly, to respond to their needs with genuine compassion. This transformation is not the result of moral effort alone, though ethical development is part of the path. Rather, it is the natural consequence of a consciousness that has begun to recognize its true nature and its fundamental connection with all of life. The journey toward enlightenment, understood as learning to speak the language of peace, is thus both utterly simple and deeply profound. It is simple because it requires nothing but attention. The peace we seek is already within us. It is profound because this recognition reverberates through every level of our being, transforming how we think, how we feel, how we act, and ultimately, who we understand ourselves to be. Step by step, moment by moment, as we practice turning our attention toward peace, as we develop the capacity to recognize and rest in the stillness beneath the surface turbulence of life, we discover that we have never been separate from that which we sought. We have always been held in divine peace, we have only needed to recognize it. In this recognition lies the beginning of true enlightenment, not as a distant achievement reserved for the spiritually elite, but as a natural unfolding available to anyone willing to turn their attention inward and learn the first language of the soul, peace.